Good morning guys, and welcome to another Saturday vlog. Today brings us to a town which is within Milton Keynes. It's synonymous with a plot which ended up being a royal murder. It is a location where old fables and stories were told between people transferring from London to Birmingham backwards and forwards to the old coaching houses. There is a tower that has survived the plague, a civil war amongst others, and it's also the home of, or close to the home of, a battle which involved an infamous warrior queen. Anyway, let's go and do this. We are, of course, in the picturesque Milton Keynes town of Stony Stratford. Now, for years I've heard a story that my father told me. Obviously I believed it was true, something that he turned around and said, something that happened with an old king and two princes in a tower. Basically that story is the story of a man who went on to be king. Pretty sinister, real nasty bloke, ended up being the King of England. But what happened here in this town is quite unbelievable. I never even knew it happened until speaking to a guy at work, and he turned around and said, if you look at the signpost, there's one around the building and it depicts that this is the place where it happened. So the story of the two princes in the Tower of London, goes back, I think it's the 1480s possibly. The guy himself went on to become Richard III, and Richard III, then he was Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He met up with Henry V, I believe it was, here outside a Rose and Crown Inn, it was at the time, and he abducted, I think he was Edward IV, and his brother. They were only young princes at the time. They took the rest of the family, allegedly, supposedly, that they arrested them. The rest of the family were taken to Pontefract Castle, where they were beheaded, and the two princes disappeared from the world. Basically, they were taken to the Tower of London and they were never seen again. Now, years later, workmen renovating, I believe this was the 1700s, renovating the old White Tower, found a box containing two child skeletons. And they were walled up under a stairwell, and the remains have been kind of verified. They turned around and said that they were the two princes. But anyhow, this is the location in Stony Stratford of where it all came about. The old inn, I can show you, we'll walk up to it, there's a little plinth there, and it depicts what actually happened. Okay, this is your spot of your once Rose and Crown Inn, and that is where Richard III and his companions, etc. I suppose he wanted to be king himself, but they abducted the two princes from this spot, and the rest is history, sinister history. Now, his treachery did not end there. From there on, when Edward V was due to become king, Richard claimed that him and his brother were illegitimate and claimed the throne himself, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, became Richard III. So, not a very nice guy at all. There's a plaque over there on the old George Freehouse pub. Now, if you look at the level of the window panes there on the lower floor, where that woman's just walked past, that would be the actual way that the land used to lie. That was the original street level. It's obviously built up a lot since then. Have any of you guys heard the term cock and ball story? Abbreviated to be a load of bull, amongst certainly other words which are not suitable for a family channel. But this is the home area of where the fables and the origins of that come from. Basically, there's two staging houses along here to the right, one called the Cock Hotel, one called the Bull Hotel, and back in the day stories would go backwards and forth, being more exaggerated truths Some made up stories for sure, some even lies, and they were just a way of entertaining people that were visiting the area. So this would be your famous Cock Hotel, and then you pan round, and right there basically next to it is your Bull Hotel. Now they were both staging posts, because pretty much we are bang smack in the middle of the journey that the old coaches would have made between London and Birmingham and vice versa back in the day. Now down here to the left, all of this area would have been your old stables where the horses would have been kept. It's round this area and to the right, which you can't get through there at the moment, but the coaches would have been kept down here, and the guests would have been kept here and entertained with stories which would have got exaggerated as they went backwards and forwards between the two hotels. And that is where your cock and bull story comes from. If you ever hear that term, wherever you are in the world, it originated right here in Stony Stratford. Now the Bull Hotel is synonymous and famous for where the planning went in action for the Grand Union Canal. There was a junction put in there, and the Cock Hotel is famous for some of its visitors, which were of course the Duke of Wellington, Samuel Johnson, the author of the first ever dictionary, and of course Charles Dickens. Okay, now we're going to go and have a look at the Magdalene Tower, which has seen the plague, it's the civil war, amongst other things. All that remains is the tower, because I believe it was back in the 17th century, I think.
Yeah, by the looks of it.
There was a huge fire which started in the Bull Hotel from one of the maids. I think she scalded one of the sheets, and to hide it she put it up the chimney. From there it caught fire, and unfortunately the fire spread. It took, I believe, 146 homes in the area, including the church. Now the church used to sit here, spread out along this way. It had 6 large bells. These graves here go back at least 200-300 years. Some of the more notable ones are about, I think it's 218 years old. There's a guy called John Burt who was a surgeon in the area. Now his grave at the time would have been grated, because the 19th century, the early 19th century, was predominantly a time where you had crimes such as grave robbing, and they would have put grates over the graves to try and stop that from actually happening. But I do find the graveyard quite peaceful, and it is good when it becomes overgrown like this. There is a doorway, but there is no access to the tower whatsoever. I believe this was put here for people to sit and contemplate, etc. over the years. And that is all that is left of it. For sure, it certainly is one big tower. And if you can see, on each point there are gargoyles. Now the reason for gargoyles was to depict evil, basically showing the world that there is evil out there. But the term gargoyle, which is a French term, as you can see there, the use of them was to dispel the water from the top of the roofs, and the term gargoyle actually means to gargle with air and water. So it's a French term, that's where your gargoyle comes from. They're also called grotesques. So come, no historian or expert on this, I actually read up on it. Kind of doing your homework, so to speak. That is a beautiful door, but you certainly can't get in there. That seriously is nature taking over. Look at the moss actually growing into the shape of the letters.
Okay, so here some of the tombstones said, "Here lies a body who did no good, and if it had lived, it never would. Where it has gone and how it fares, nobody knows and nobody cares." Because at that point in time, no one supervised inscriptions to prevent anything of an unseemly or irrelevant character being placed over the remains of the departed.
You can see from this old tomb here where the bolt marks are, and there's your wrought iron, which would have been a gated bit it went across. That would have been bolted on each of these sections and really anchored down to stop grave robbers getting to it. We've stopped at the old schoolhouse, free house pub, which used to obviously be a schoolhouse as denoted by its name. I am having a celebratory pint because I'm now at 500 subscribers. Not that I asked for subscribers. People know how YouTube works, so you do your own thing basically. Rachel's enjoying a coffee, and I am going to tell the story of the Warrior Queen Boudicca. It's one of those things that goes, what's in a name? Before I was even born, there was my sister first, and my father had this wacky idea of naming his children after people famous, pretty much from a medieval period. He'd done a lot of jousting, etc. I went on to become Robert Paulwinner, which is my surname. The name I was given, I was originally going to be called Robert the Bruce. I will go into telling his story when we go up and visit Scotland at some point, because it's synonymous with my name. My sister, however, although she's called Deborah and we call her Debs, she was originally going to be called Boudicca or Boudicca, as it's sometimes wrongly pronounced. I don't know how they worked it out, but it's a pagan name, so it would have been Boudicca. And Boudicca herself, she had her most famous battle that she lost actually happened at a place called Cuttle Mill, which is literally 5 miles north of here, between here where we are in Stony Stratford and a place called Toaster. I've looked around the area. There is a few fields at the back. You cannot gain access to it. It's private land. There's an old reclaim centre that's on one of the locations, and this is one of many possible spots that they've said throughout history where it could have happened. Some are further north. This is the infamous Battle of Watling Street between the Iceni tribe and the Romans. Now basically the story of Boudicca is, Boudicca was married to a Iceni king by the name of, I think it's Practinus or Practin, something like that. I'm not very good at the pronunciation of them names of that time. He was pretty much left to rule his realm, which was North Norfolk area, sort of around King's Lynn on to Cromer and a bit further down, maybe Norwich area, etc. And the Romans left them alone. The Romans had been here for a good probably 50 years at that time. We're talking AD, which means after dinner of course, AD 60, 61 was when the uprising happened. Now he died, people didn't live that long at that period of time, and he left in his will his land, all his worldly goods, to be shared between Boudicca, their 2 daughters, and also split between the Roman Empire. Now the Romans just embellished it. Didn't want anything to do with it. They said, "What, we're claiming that," and they claimed the land. They flogged Boudicca and they raped the 2 daughters. Now obviously in rage, as anyone would be, she obviously went against that. She started to form an army of rebels, warriors, sort of barbarian-esque, like Celts. The pagans were like Celts, so the people like you have are the Irish, Welsh, some of your Scots, etc. They were of that sort of, not much in the way of armour and battle, were very much a rough and tugged sort of band of people. They would face paint themselves. They're very much like later on in life you've got Braveheart with the face paint, etc. That's what Celtic warriors were like. And they initially started their uprising, and they did what they call sacking a place. And they sacked Colchester. Now what that basically means is they went in there, they raped, pillaged, burnt, sacrificed, killed absolutely everyone in sight, burnt Colchester to the ground. They went on to Londinium after that, which obviously nowadays we know as London. They destroyed London. They then moved north to Valerian, which is now known as St Albans, and done the same there. And the idea was just to continually going through Watling Street, which we are on in Stony Stratford. The old A5 runs, which is called Watling Street, runs all the way through from London, through Stony, up through North Wales to Holyhead. Now their idea was to continue the battle and just destroy the Roman leagues and empires, etc. on this side of the continent. Now Paulinus, who was the governor of Britain at the time, a Roman general, he obviously was staying pretty much out of it with his troops further in the northwest, but they had formed an elite army of an estimated 10,000 troops, and they marched their way down and they met head on. They waited for the Iceni tribe, which was made of various tribes. It was overall called an Iceni tribe. They waited in a little hamlet area which is called Cuttle Mill. They had forest behind them, and they met there, and there was somewhere in the region of 23 to 30,000 of this Iceni tribe that went up against 10,000 Romans. Now the Romans, although they were outnumbered a good 3 to 1, they were forged in combat. They had their shields, they would form their squares like the Battle of Waterloo, etc. Obviously the Romans were the first to do this. Their shields would go over the head and the side, and they'd use like a stabbing motion against the onslaught of the Iceni in front of them. Now that meant they were chopping them to pieces, and the undoing of them was the fact that they could no longer move backwards, because the Iceni tribe, when they would travel about, they were like, I suppose they call it, in caravan. They took basically the kitchen sink with them. Women, children, animals, all their worldly goods were kept with caravans at the back of the area. Now that was at the back of the battlefield, which unfortunately made a huge corridor from which they couldn't escape. So the Romans advanced, they were sort of huddled together, couldn't fight against them, and were slaughtered by the thousands, women, children, animals, etc. Now there's two stories to what happened to Boudicca. Many believe that she took a poison and killed herself. Now there are the romantic amongst us that believe that because she was a warrior queen, she would not have done this, and she was so much outraged and she was prepared to die in battle, which she done when she amassed the troops like they would do in the first place, that she found herself to the side of the battle, was injured. The idea was that she would make her way further south to a place called Magdalene, I think it is, now known as Stony Stratford, but she didn't believe she was that bad, but she succumbed to her injuries and died at a place that they believe to be Newton Longville, which is a mile behind where we live. There's a place there that is now known as Dead Queen Farm, which is a dog kennels between Bletchley and Newton Longville. That is supposedly the spot where she fell and obviously died, and that was the end of her. But no one knows what happened to the daughters. It's all very vague. So the romantic side of us turns around and says that she got injured and got away, as opposed to just taking a poison. But that's the story of Boudicca. It is with that I can honour my sister, because that's who my sister was to have been named after, although she ended up becoming Deborah, but that's a different story. Anyway guys, that is the end of today's vlog. I've kind of enjoyed it. It's been difficult, it really has been difficult. When you're vlogging in the likes of America, it's all so easy. When you come here and you're walking through a general street, people are not comfortable when you're walking with a camera past them, so there's a lot of cutting and to and fro and waiting for people to walk past you, so it sort of breaks it up a lot. I certainly tried today, certainly tried to get it out there. I hope you've enjoyed the stories. I hope this inspires yourselves to go out there, look in your own area. Maybe you have history, maybe you have a story to tell. And with that, guys, cheers, enjoy the rest of your weekend, be safe, I'll see you in the movies, bye for now.